We're live. All right, we're live. I'm here with Peter Lavelle. This is Alex Christoforou. Guys, let me know if you hear us on the chat. Peter, how are you doing today?
Very, very well. We get an excellent crosstalk. It'll be on in a few hours' time.
All right, excellent, excellent. Guys, do you hear us out there? Just drop us a message on the chat if everything is okay. We are waiting for Alexander Mercouris to jump on. Until then, it will be Peter Lavelle doing the heavy lifting.
Going solo. Going solo.
Going solo. He will not have any problem answering all your questions. We will do our best to answer most of the questions. We will do our best to answer all the questions on the chat. And if you guys send us a super chat, it is always appreciated. We will try to answer those super chats.
I'm not a liberal. I don't know everything. Okay, I'm a conservative.
All right, and hopefully Alexander will jump on to join us here shortly, guys. You can remember to always subscribe to our YouTube channel. That helps us out a lot. Like the videos, that also helps us out a lot. Share the videos with your friends. Once again, you're helping us out, you're helping us grow, and you're helping us reach people. And also go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, and visit our PayPal page and our new Patreon page and donate as well so we can continue to broadcast to you. So Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Hello, everybody out there on YouTube joining us for this chat. We sent a message out to everybody via YouTube, a post on the community, and we got some questions that we'd like to kick things off with. And the first question in the list, Peter, actually was, do we think Trump can make it to 2020? And do we think that all the stuff that they're throwing at Trump actually turns off the liberals?
Well, I think first that, that's probably the most important question we can ponder after the midterms, which is rapidly coming towards us. The power of the presidency is it's very powerful, the presidency in the United States. I still believe that if the Democrats get the House, recontrol the House, they will proceed with impeachment, but not with the goal that it'll actually happen. It is just to be the next level of resistance. Basically, they want to make sure that Trump can't do anything for the remainder of his term in office. So I think that is really their aim to do it. I don't think they would have the votes to do it. Having said that, with this the confirmation fiasco of Brett Kavanaugh, I'm hoping it'll generate the base to get out. I mean, this is absurd what is going on right now. In jurisprudence, you have the person that is accusing go. The person that is accused doesn't go first, okay? The state makes their case against the accused, and then you have a rebuttal. What the Democrats are doing is reversing it. So this is ridiculous. I have to wonder if it's going to motivate people to get out to vote. Now, it can motivate people on the liberal side as well, which we've seen how the mainstream media has whipped this up into a hysteria. It's absolutely absurd, the whole thing. So yes, I think he can survive. I guess the really question is that in what state can he survive? Now, he had this. He was going to. At the beginning of the week, he was ordering that all of these DOJ and FBI and Bruce Orr, all this stuff was supposed to be released, and then he backpedaled it, and that is very frustrating because I truly believe, I've been following this nonsense for the entire 2 years. You get these things out and you get to see where the real collusion is, and the whole Mueller investigation deflates, okay? He has the power to do this. He did say something in one of his rallies, which was very interesting, because of some of our allies. So more countries are involved in the American election, I suppose, okay? And so they don't want that exposed here. And Trump is, again, the neocons around him. They circle the wagons around him. And, there's no one in the room saying, but this is our country, it's our elections, and these people met outsiders, even our allies, in our own domestic affairs. And you can't, everyone on the liberal side keeps saying it's the Russians, but there's no evidence of it. Well, apparently there is some evidence of other countries doing it. So the short answer to the question, I think yes, he will make it to 2020, but will he be limping? Big unknown.
Big unknown. All right, guys. Everyone says that the voice is okay. They say that my image is a little grainy. Sorry, guys. I'm right now in Athens, Greece. The internet is not so super at Athens, but we will make it by as best we can. I have Peter Lavelle with me. Peter, we have a lot of questions, including questions that people submitted before we did the before we got on the live chat. I see questions now about Orban's visit to Moscow. Give us a story about that. What do you think?
Well, after the European Union and the European Commission, you know, after they had this inquisition against Orban and Hungary, which, you know, Orban is very popular in Hungary, getting more popular. He came back to power in the recent election in a very strong position. And to be subject to that kind of insulting. I mean, the Hungarian, I lived there for a short while in the 1990s. So very interesting people, very intellectual people. You know, no wonder they produce so many chess masters. They don't talk a lot. It's really interesting. They're quiet people. They're very introverted people. And it's kind of odd because Hungarians used to be the Molders of Europe. I mean, you know, the Hungarians, you know, I mean, people, they were pretty rough characters to deal with. And then they settled down. And Hungarians are very much in touch with their culture. They're very proud of it, and it has a great history to it. And as I warned them, and I warned my Polish friends, when you get into the European Union, they're going to take your culture away from you. They will, okay? And you have to understand, if you look at Europe during the Cold War, half of it was in the Soviet bloc, and then you have the Western bloc. The Western bloc secularized itself, okay? And the European Union is the icing on top of the cake. But with the end of the Cold War, Eastern Europe desecularized itself. And their culture and their national traits and traditions are now back in vogue. You have to remember, during the Soviet period, it was very uniform. I traveled through all the Eastern Bloc in the 1980s. And it was a very uniform, well, to a large extent, it was uniform. And now at the end of the Cold War, there is this reawakening of their traditional cultures. Now, I'm not going to throw around the word nationalism, because that's what everybody wants me to do, which has been misappropriated by the left, okay? Patriotism, being proud of your culture. And this is what Orban is all about. And believe me, there are people in Austria that feel the same way, in parts of Italy, even within the German government. The Poles feel this way, the Slovakians feel this way. It's the Hungarians are not alone in this. And then you come to Moscow. Orban is not going to leave the European Union. Hungary isn't going to leave the European Union anytime soon. But it's basically, he was telling them, look, I have options too. We're a sovereign country, and we have the right to have sovereign foreign relations. And so it was basically, Orban is saying, can you spell a middle finger, okay? And you could tell he enjoyed it. And of course, Russia is looking for it doesn't have a partner in the EU, all right? So it has to look at other elements within the European Union. The trade relations are very important, particularly when it comes to energy. Hungary would like to be part of that route, all right? So it's a message to the European Union, you know, don't kick your members around. And there is still sovereignty in these separate individual member states. And the Poles have been saying that also. So why should Brussels be adjudicating what judicial practices and branches and all that they have in Warsaw? I don't know why, all right? And why should Brussels dictate, or I should say Berlin, dictate, you know, who enters their country? You know, it's the Hungarians didn't cause the mess in North Africa, in the Middle East, okay? That's further on the other side of the Atlantic, okay? So why should the Hungarian people pay the price of what some armchair intellectuals in the Pentagon do? You know, it's a message to the EU. Don't treat your member states like this, because Hungary isn't alone, and they do have some leverage, because look what happened with Brexit. The precedent has been set.
Let's talk about Brexit. We have some questions on Brexit too, Peter. Salzburg, Theresa May. It didn't work over too well for her. What do you think?
The thing is that, you know, Cameron foolishly called this referendum. He was such an idiot. He didn't have to do it. He didn't have to do it. Well, he did. And if Brexit passes, I will resign. Well, it did pass. He didn't resign. And then you had the inter-party conflict within the Tories, and then you come up with this faceless bureaucrat with no achievements whatsoever. As a matter of fact, a lot of embarrassments on her watch, and she still couldn't commit to it. The problem is that the Tories, they say they're going to do it, but they never seem to find a way to do it. And the answer of the European Union is, the clock is ticking, okay? You want out. All right. But they can't come up with a deal. And the European Union is playing hardball. I don't really blame them. You want to be part of the club? That's fine. But the interesting thing is what Theresa May and Cameron, with mindless Cameron, God, I'm glad he's gone, is that they thought, well, we'll get a good deal from the Americans. Well, Donald Trump is also saying, can you spell a middle finger? Why should we give you a special deal? And then you have the foreign secretary, Galveston, in Ukraine, acting like he's George Patton. You know, he's just a little corporal in the Imperium's army. And he, we're important to your security. Well, what is Britain's role going to be in NATO after Brexit? Nobody really knows. Okay, and then they want to the Poles. The Poles are a special nation to me. I mean, they're begging America to put a military base. I mean, for most of Polish history, they were trying to get rid of occupiers, and now they want another one. Okay, all I say to my Polish friends, if your buddies in the Baltic states, want to tempt Russia, and there's a tripwire and there's a conflict, Poles, my friends, you want to have a major base in your country? That will be the first thing that will be obliterated in a matter of minutes. Think. Instead of having Galveston go to Ukraine and arming them and training them, and instead of Trump wanting to have some kind of military base in Poland, why don't we just stop and think, how can we demilitarize all of this stuff? Right. Because who is the real threat? The real threat is that the Pentagon will lose its funding to buy weapons for a defense that is not necessary. That is the real tragedy. And Hungary is a symptom of what's going on here. One size, folks, doesn't fit all. And that's what the EU, as I've said before, and the duplication of NATO on top of it. EU, NATO. That's what the Washington consensus wants, okay? But it's not working out on the ground and in real life.
All right, Peter, stay with that thought. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to that. We have some super chats, though. Mr. Furkas donated €5. Thank you very much for that €5 super chat. No question asked. Jay Walker, he was the one that asked the question about Trump. He donated £1.99 and also bought a Duran hoodie. Thank you very much, Mr. Walker, for that super chat. And Peter, going on that, we have a question from Claire Shaw, who asks, Peter
Claire,
Lavelle.
Hi, Claire. Okay.
Peter Lavelle, please define nationalism.
Let's talk about the word nation first, okay? Basically, if you look at the development of the nation state, the nation in the West, is that essentially you have local bonds, people that are tied together through religion, through tradition, dress code, cuisine, past experiences. And what we had was you started developing structures to protect that group of people. That's when you start coming up with the idea of a border. They're not like us over there. We're here. And this is the origins of it. In the East, you basically had states create nations. It was reverse. And this is one of the tensions that we see going through the world right now, because the importance of, see, in the East, in Eastern Europe, you had very volatile, weak states or commonwealths, kingdoms. They were very, very weak and open to outside manipulation. In Eastern Europe, all the way up to like Sweden, all the way down to Bulgaria, you had weak elites, and they were not part of the global trading system of whatever it was at the time. And so they were very open to manipulation. The Russians manipulated, the Germans, the Austrians, the Turks. And they had to create stronger states to protect what was still a developing national sense of identity. Western national identity was developed much faster. Look at the UK. Look at like Denmark and Norway and Sweden, because they had a much more of a breathing space, as it were, and there were hardly any other kinds of people, and they weren't so open to invasion. So now nationalism is a dirty word because postmodernism has made it a dirty word. There's nothing wrong with, you can use the word my community, okay? That kind of deflates it a little bit. It doesn't mean it can't have another person, a different ethnic group, a different religious one to a point. I mean, usually it is more monolithic, but all through the West and in the East, there were always Jews there. As the further south you go into Europe, there were always Muslims there, or when they came up after the advent of Islam. And so in the West, they want to destroy a sense of nation because they want everything centralized. They want everything centralized. It's very much like rebuilding the Soviet Union, okay? Let me give you a quick story that's funny. I remember telling one of my directors at Crosstalk, oh, you know, the EU is trying to mandate that there's the same kind of beer glass all across the European Union. And in certain cultures, they had a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, a little bit thicker. You know, it was their beer glass, you know. And you know what my Russian friend said? Oh, who cares about the size of the glass as long as there's beer? Now, that's a Russian way of looking at it, which I thought was really smart, okay? And it's this conformity that I think that, you know, what they did in the West is they make everything more, everything has to be uniform and standardized. And that's why you can write rules, you can do this, you can do that. And that's a way to destroy national beliefs, because you know what, nations go to war, and we get rid of nations, we won't go to war. That's an argument that has not been really tested here, okay? Democracies never go to war. Well, let's see, okay? And what is a democracy? I don't think democracy is very powerful at all in the West anymore. I think at one time it was. And then you have these Eastern European countries that had kingdoms and commonwealths in the 20th century for a short amount of time. They had something that we would call something resembling liberal democracy, and then fascism took over. No one likes to talk about fascist regimes in Eastern Europe in the interwar period, but they were almost all of them, with the exception of Czechoslovakia. They had some fascistic elements. And then you have the Cold War. You have the Eastern Europe being brought into the Soviet orbit. Their national aspirations were dampened considerably. You speak Russian, read Karl Marx, read Lenin. I saw it in every single language in Eastern Europe. Now they have this moment. It's like a spring of nations from 1848, when we had this really a rising of national identity, and in a positive way, I think, because you had all the kings and the queens and the czars and the kaisers and all that. They were following upon the tradition of 1879 with the French Revolution, and actually inspired by Americans as well with 1776. So the nation is how you identify yourself within a community, and that's not wrong, okay? Justin Trudeau, that buffoon from Canada, said there's no national identity in Canada. See, that's liberalism, okay? We will tell you what your identity is. We will engineer you into what we want you are, because nations are bad, nationalism is bad. No, it's not, okay? It can be abused if you go into ethno-nationalism, blood. It's my blood, that because I have this blood, it makes me superior. That's nonsense, okay? And it ended badly in the 20th century, people that thought that way. That's nonsense, okay? It's values. That helps create a nation as well. Sometimes it's Catholicism, Protestantism, Calvinism. Religion is very important in that. Christianity is the foundations of Western civilization. You can deplore it all you want, but that's the truth. Claire, I hope I somehow answered whatever you wanted me in that question.
Well, Claire did a follow-up, and she said, I hope Peter will do a crosstalk discussion about nationalism soon. So going on that, Peter, we have a question from John Hennessy. He says, will Peter write a history book? I would buy it.
I have some ideas. I'm not gonna do any spoilers right now, but during my vacation in August, I started putting together some things. a lot of history, because that's my passion, media, because that's what gets my blood boiling, and political philosophy, because I think this post-Marxist, post-modernist agenda that's being forced down our throats is destroying everything that we hold of value, everything.
All right, I have a question on Russia, but before that, we have a super chat, Peter, from Neil Gardner, £5. He says, what do you say to those who claim the likes of Orban and Salvini are neo-fascists who could unleash violence against Europe's growing Muslim population? So what do you say to those who claim that?
I don't see any evidence for that. Now, look, in one of the unfortunate things, and it's particularly in the last couple of years, and I'm glad this question is asked because I want to be very clear about something. Conservatives, real conservatives, have abhor Nazis, neo-Nazis, fascism. That is not in tune with my values. I don't believe in force. I believe in reason. I believe in discourse. I do not automatically make a judgment about someone's color or their ethnicity, their creed, or their religion. It has nothing to do with how I think. Now, I don't know Orban, but everything I've been looking at in his struggle with the European Union tells me it has nothing to do with any extremist groups whatsoever. This is what the left does. They invent enemies for all of us to fight. You know, it's really fascinating. Conservatives, what do? We look at is what is possible that can be done given the information we have. You try to do it as inclusively as possible. That means debate and democracy. The left is just the reverse. They look for enemies. And if you aren't against them, then you're part of the problem. See, we work in the realm of ideas. The left works in the realm of intimidation, looking for enemies, demonizing them. You know, and if you don't agree with us, and this is an absolutely destructive thing to do because this is identitarian politics. You know, what they do is it's just politics of victimization. And the more victimized you are, the more virtuous you are. What a sack of horse shit. That's ridiculous. Let me just say, white people invented slavery. No, slavery has been around, was around from time immemorial. Just about every single population up until the 19th century was enslaved at one time. Virtually every, white, black, brown, everything. All right? You know, if you look at the slave trade from Africa to America, just as many whites were sold into the Arab world. Okay? Now, what people ended slavery? White people did. And really use sanctions in a smart way. We won't trade with you if you trade in black slaves. It's wrong. All right? So, you know, trying to paint people as extremists. First of all, there are extremist people out there. And if you look at some of the rallies at some of these skinheads, I think there was one a few weeks ago, 16 of them show up in a bus in Washington or someplace near Washington. And then there was another case where there were Trump supporters and they said, hey, get away from us. We have nothing to do with you people, okay? I always speak my mind. I know sometimes I offend people. You don't have the right not to be offended, but you learn. We all learn by being offended and believing that the person you're talking to has some kind of authenticity and legitimacy. At least give them a hearing, all right? Just because I wear a bow tie, does that make me a radical right-winger? No, okay? Why should it? I hope that answers.
There you go. Great. We've got another super chat, $10. From WD Fosroy, no question. Thank you for the $10 super chat. Duncan McKeon says Peter should write a book with Jordan Peterson, maybe.
Oh, I love Jordan Peterson.
Not a bad idea. Peter, another question. Is Russia a liberal democracy?
It's a Russian democracy. That's what it is. No, I mean, you have to understand here, people in Russia, I think because of the Soviet experience, and because of the catastrophe of the 1990s, just to put this into context, the Great Depression in the United States saw the US economy contract 25%. That is, My father's generation, that was the most important memory of their life, the Great Depression. In Russia during the 1990s, the economy collapsed 50%. Put that into perspective, okay? Politics were chaotic. There was a lot of what we call taxi political parties, meaning some rich guy made a party just for one election cycle to get himself in to parliament so he would have a legal immunity. Okay, that's how much he believed in the Russian people. Okay, and then when you had Putin come to power, a lot of that nonsense was put into order. Okay, no more of these pedestal parties. They're just basically crooks with money, and Russians, they look at democracy as a procedure. It's something you do for an outcome that you want. We just had recent city elections here in Moscow. And, you know, the communists come out, they have their spiel, the liberals, and then United Russia, which I call the party of power. And the party of power won. It's not because it was fiddled with, is that, well, over the last 18 years in Moscow, it's turned into a pretty nice shiny penny compared to most Western cities, I can tell you that. Russians don't think about democracy very much. A lot of Russians don't even really talk about politics. Now, the last few weeks, there was a huge debate about pension reform. Yeah, a lot of hair on fire here, okay? Because, you know, they've been used to having some kind of pension because of the Soviet Union. The Soviet legacy remains in Russia because people want all the free stuff. They don't want to have to pay for it, okay? And so there's that tension right there. But yes, democracy is here. I think the political parties need to be more developed. I think they have a long way to go with their message. I think it's really regrettable that there is not a conservative party in Russia. I think that's really needed. And the Communist Party of Russia is basically what you'd find in Western Europe, a socialist party like in Italy or in Spain. All the Marxist Leninism stuff is gone. So democracy is here, but it's not something that people think about very much. Now, if things start going sideways, maybe they will. Russians, they vote for people and they say, you take care of the problems. That's why you're there. We've got other things to do. And that's their kind of relationship with it. Unlike in the US, unlike maybe in the UK, it's not a secular religion. It's just not. It's a procedure, nothing more.
Let's stay on Russia for another question real quickly. We're approaching 500 viewers. Thank you guys for joining the live chat. We are still waiting on Alexander Mercouris. Hopefully he jumps on very soon, but Peter's doing a great job as always trying to knock out all your questions that you have. And there are a lot of questions, Peter. So here's another one on Russia real quick before we move on to what happened in Iran. Some questions on that, but one more on Russia. Question for Peter. How influential do you believe Alexander Dugin is on Vladimir Putin and how he operates as a statesman?
Well, that's the liberal media for you. Dugin has zero influence on Vladimir Putin, okay? I think it was, 2 years ago, Dugin lost his job at the university. Putin didn't intervene to protect him. No. Dugin he's a free agent, okay? He does what he does, okay? Some of his ideas on Eurasianism is kind of interesting, and some of it's not. He's a personality, and he likes to put himself out there in the public. He's a free agent. He does what he wants to do. But there is no evidence at all that Dugin has any influence on Vladimir Putin at all. I see this all the time, and I just go, who told you that, okay? I guess it was just the limousine liberals in Moscow that tell, CNN and Bloomberg that stuff. But I don't see any evidence of it. Would Dugin say he has influence over Putin? Yeah, he might, but I don't see any real evidence of that.
All right, we got another super chat from Marcia Dietrich. No question, but $10 for the super chat. Thank you very much. Peter, what do you make of what happened in Iran with, I believe it's 29 people have now been confirmed killed via this terrorist activity?
I don't know. I don't want to jump the gun on this one here. There are protests in Iran. The economy is going through some tough patches right now. People are upset. What they're upset about is local issues. There are groups outside of Iran, the MEK, that the United States used to list as a terrorist group. Now they've embraced them. I mean, Giuliani, Rudy, I mean, really, he embraces these people. These people are fanatics. They're a sect. and they've vowed to do anything they can to meddle inside of Iran on behalf of the United States and its allies. Until we know more, is it possible that this was organized and planned outside of Iran? That's very possible, but do I know? No, I don't, and we need to know some more information. But obviously, there's an enormous amount of outside pressure, and it's supported by the United States and the West to see bad things happen in Iran. This is one of the great phobias of America. I remember the hostage crisis. You know, I remember it all, and the American political class is just really blinded by its hatred. It doesn't take into account what the United States did in Iran before the revolution with the Shah. They never take into account of that. They never take into account that the U.S. and the UK supported a coup that overthrew a democratically elected government in 1953, Mossadegh government. They never reflect upon those things. So this story is far from over. This is one of my biggest worries of the Trump administration, is that they're too much under the influence of the Saudi and Israeli lobby when it comes to Iran. And you know what, everybody? No one wins. No one. This is a really bad track. Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. I mean, how many times do you have to repeat that over and over again without any kind of reflection? Look at the kind of violence in the Middle East across the world when it deals with Islam. The Sunnis, folks, the Iranians are Shia, okay? And there is a Jewish population living in Iran. There's a large Jewish community in Tehran. They have membership. They have members in parliament. I mean, come on, folks.
Yeah, Peter, going back to, there was a question before we started the chat from Space Cat. I believe I got his name right. And I know you don't know much about the conservative movement in this party in Canada, the People's Party of Canada, but going back to the theme of nationalism, conservative ideas, what do you think of a conservative movement or a split in the conservative movement in Western democracies like Canada?
Well, you know, obviously in the way democracy is designed, it's basically designed, unfortunately, is to delegitimize the power elites, okay? And a great deal of the time it's just playing one party off the other, and then they say, see, we have democracy here, when it's not. It's just kind of, you know, 2 or 3 characters that go in there and go through the motions. That's why Trump irritates the hell out of people, because he didn't play the game, okay? And that's why a lot of Republicans hate him. I think I would like to see, and it's the Benedict option in that sense, and I don't want to overly Catholicize it, but basically, I think real conservatives have to stop imbibing this liberal Kool-Aid and let them determine the terms and conditions of our agenda and how to move forward. Because there's too many compromises all of the time. This is what conservatives have done way too much over the last 50 years. It's time to say, you stop moving the goalpost on me, all right? That's what they do. And conservatives have bowed down too many times. Now, all of this stuff, you know, when I read these stories, but, you know, what 13-year-old girls are having their breasts surgically removed from them and put on all this drugs and affect their gender and all that. I mean, that's child abuse. We have to start saying stop on these things here. Stop inverting Jim Crow against white people. I mean, now as conservatives are the greatest defender of Martin Luther King. Who would have thought, okay? You don't judge people by the color of their skin. That is a profound thing to say, but you can't say it. The left doesn't believe that anymore. So conservatives need to. People say, I always say I'm not a Republican. How can I be in a party of Republicans when there was John McCain and Lindsey Graham? And I could list a whole lot of other ones, okay? They're lunatics. And they don't stand up for conservatism at all. They bow to power. They drink the liberal Kool-Aid. And they just say they are. Okay, I don't see anything conservative about them at all.
All right, let's move now to Syria. And Jan Schoenfeld sent us a super chat, Canadian $10. And thank you, Jan, for the super chat, by the way. And he followed it up with a question. This is, I guess, the million-dollar question, Peter. Will the U.S. leave Syria?
The billion-dollar question.
Billion-dollar question. Definite trillion is what the U.S. is spending on all this stuff.
You know, what's the name of the person that asked the question?
Schoenfield. Yeah, Schoenfield.
It really, I don't want to sound like I got Iran on my head, but I think it has a lot to do with the Trump administration's plans vis-a-vis Iran. They want to have a foothold in Syria. And it's one of these very strange things when we have forced regime change strategies. Before, there was always the strategy of regime change, and then you go, now it's reversed. They're there, and they don't really know what to do with what they've got illegally. When the issue with Idlib is resolved, then it'll be a conversation about what to do about the illegal American presence in Syria. Certainly Iran doesn't want it. Syria doesn't want it. I would even say Jordan doesn't want it because it brings too much attention there. And the Saudis are cowards, so they're the ones that are the first to hit the door when things go wrong. Okay, and the Israelis are big losers because that will bring stability will come to Syria. That's their worst nightmare, that a stable Syria that they can't control. And they can't force a partition. Now that begs the question about what is Turkey going to do? That's probably the $10 trillion question. I don't know. Okay, but the status quo is not tenable. Okay, Turkey is essentially wanting to annex northern Syria. I don't see it. I don't see it happening. I think we could get a frozen conflict for a while, but there are too many interested parties like Iran. And the longer the Americans and the Turks stay in Syria, the stronger Iran gets. Hello, everybody. Think about all the way from 2003, the illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq, today. All of the events that Israel, the Saudis, the Americans, the Brits and the French, and the Turks have done, they've actually enhanced the Iranian position in the Middle East. So, you know, quit while you're ahead, guys. So we have to wait. One, the posture towards Iran, the clearing out of Idlib, which it will happen, and what's it going to take to get the Turks out? Because the Turks have created a nightmare for themselves. So they've been funding, supporting, salarying, allowing an open border into Syria of all these terrorists. These terrorists only have one place to go, Turkey. Erdogan, you didn't think it through, did you?
Yeah, okay, Peter, you answered a question that someone had, which was, what do you think of the double game that Turkey is playing in Syria?
You know, before Erdogan, Turkey had this remarkable slogan, I hope I get it right, a no problems with neighbors policy, where they could resolve problems with all of their neighbors. Erdogan's getting it to the point where he's going to have problems with all his neighbors, including his NATO allies. Again, not well thought out.
Peter, share some books or reading material that so I can better understand your ideas of conservatism from N.A. McIntosh. Influences.
Okay, well, you know, come next week and I'll have a list. Okay, and nothing much coming in my mind. Well, what I can tell you is a website that I go to every single day that I really, really enjoy is theamericanconservative.com. It's really remarkable. It's very philosophical. It does cover the day-to-day breaking news and all that. It doesn't. They could have more articles, but they do talk about the role of faith in society, which I think is really important to talk about. They look at the challenges to the family and what needs to be done to reinvigorate the family. What the state should stop doing to us. All right. And also dissects this postmodernist movement and how it's destroying everything. It's destroying our identities. It's destroying our own personal sovereignty is what's happening here. And that's the end game, folks. Okay. That is just war, everyone against everyone. Okay. And that's not the way to go. And it marvels at the achievements of Western civilization that so much of the world wants. You know, here the liberals here want to strangle it, kill it off. Well, the rest of the world actually does think in terms of a type of democracy that would fulfill their needs. It doesn't have to be a liberal Western democracy. It can be something different. It's all about human participation, individual participation on a fair playing field. I think that's what everyone in the world would want. If we just had a fair playing field. Hey, you got that from the West. They invented that. They invented the sovereignty of the individual. And the world is striving towards that. And then you have the liberals in the European Union, the United States wanted to snuff it out. The historical irony is amazing.
Staying on bringing democracy to the world, Peter, there's a question from Nassim Gilani. Do you think Iraq is an American success story?
No, because there's 3 Iraqs, okay? There's the Kurds, there's the Shia, and there's the Sunni. And anyone worth their salt, being an expert on Iraq, who said, well, if you tip that regime over, you're going to break up the country. Anyone that was worth their salt about Ukraine, you try to flip that country to the West, you're going to break it up. Novorossiya, and you have Crimea. These policymakers don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about and what they're doing. It'd be a good idea to plant a democracy in Iraq because it will be a demonstration effect. It will happen all over the world. It's just totally destabilized the Middle East. And then the West and its allies want to take out the last secular regime in the Middle East. You can't make this stuff up, okay? Assad is the last secular regime in the Middle East.
What about the Kurdistan question?
We can keep asking it, but it's never going to be answered. I'm sorry. I got a lot of sympathy for the Kurds. I really do. But the thing is if you look at the arc of where the Kurds are, they're in way too many countries, and each one of those countries fear a restive minority. And these countries where they are minorities will work together against them in pursuit of statehood. It's your geography. You don't have a port on the sea. That'd be very important for trade. You're just too dispersed over a large area, and none of those these countries will work in concert against those, except for an outsider like the United States. But that means that all they want to do is continue a quagmire. They have no interest, zero interest in the self-determination of the Kurdish people. Full stop, okay? And anyone tells you otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about.
We got a question from, let's move back to Russia now, from Afro Priapus. What are some tech companies in Moscow? I want to move there for the club scene and the blonde Russian women. Okay, the blonde Russian, the club scene, okay, but tech companies, Peter, I mean, there's everything there.
Oh, yeah.
Uber to Google to, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, the thing is that, let me talk to you about their superstar is Yandex, okay? And that's, Yandex is the Russian answer to Google. Now, obviously, it's not as big as Google, but it's #1 in Russia and all through the former Soviet Union. They have Yandex Taxi. That's how I get home from work after my recordings. It's like Uber, but better. And, you know, before my eye, I lived here 20 years now, seeing the modernization, you know, the techization of at least Moscow is just extraordinary. You can buy everything online. You know, you pay in cafes with your phone. And I mean, everything's tech now. Okay, so and almost everybody's into it. Okay, almost everyone. The Sberbank, the largest savings bank in Russia, really conservative. I mean, really conservative bank. They drive me nuts sometimes how conservative they are. They're completely electronic. Like all of it is electronic right now. You can do it from your computer. You can do it from your phone. It's fantastic. Okay, they still have helpers in the bank for the elderly that just don't understand all of this, but that's just something that time will take care of. But it's very automated right now. You go to these shopping malls. I mean, they're super big and glitzy, and you know it is a bit expensive because of the ruble fluctuations. But you know, I say this and my Russian friends like to laugh. I said, it's just a normal country now, okay? It's got its problems like everybody else. But, you know, I love living here. It's very comfortable. Transportation, no city tops it. No, but no city tops public transportation here.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that'll take us to a question on Putin, because there's a lot of questions in the chat, Peter, especially after the IL-20 downing, whether Putin is a good leader or not. What's your take on Putin and how he handled the situation with the downing of that plane?
I think he's still dealing with it. I anticipated this question, and a lot of people are querying about how Putin has responded to it all. You had the defense minister Shoigu. He came out with some pretty firm words, okay, and then Putin came out and kind of moderated a little bit. My sense is that Russia's playing the long game. See, that's why they're going to win, okay? Because the West doesn't understand the long game, okay? They just don't, and particularly in Syria. Yeah, the Russians are really pissed off with the Israelis right now, really. But Putin knows that it's a partner in this whole mess. And the Russians cannot move forward without dealing with the Israelis. And the Israelis can't really do anything without dealing with the Russians. And I think Putin wants to keep that on track, as painful as it is. And I think that's part of his strategy. Now, I just did a crosstalk with Mark Slobodka. He was on. I mean, he's vehemently against it. And I know he's done some podcasts with us. And maybe he can go into greater depth and detail about that, because he's really up on it. He's a former military man himself. But I look at the geopolitics of it all. I think taking steps with Turkey, even though Russia and Turkey have some really strong differences when it comes to Idlib, they've found some room to maneuver and to compromise and to move forward. We need to get these terrorists out of Idlib, okay? That it has to be done. And if Turkey doesn't play the right role, it's going to, like I said earlier, it's going to alienate even the Russians. And, you know, the Russians and the Turks are not that close. I mean, it is I don't want to say marriage, it's a partnership of convenience. And that's good enough for me if it can bring peace and stability back to Syria. And Putin overall, I mean, Putin is genuinely popular here. But do people talk about Putin all day long? No, it's usually foreign correspondents and people like me that talk about him more than the average Russian does. Seriously.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one for sure. I got a $10 super chat from Rosebud. Thank you for the super chat. And our question is, Peter, if Trump gets impeached, will Mike Pence make things worse or better?
That's a tough one. My sense is they want to destroy the entire administration. I think they will, if Trump were somehow to find himself in the White House, he's a ultra conservative. I don't think Congress is going to really want to work with him. So they might just stonewall him until the 2020 election. The thing is that, you know, whatever they do to Trump, whatever they do to Pence, is that I've said this so many times, and I will keep saying it, is that they're destroying institutions that we used to rely upon. This whole Kavanaugh fiasco. I mean, they keep moving the goalposts. They keep changing their mind and making everyone jump through hoops and all that. That's destroying set procedures. It doesn't mean procedures shouldn't change through time, but they have to be agreed upon. They can't be through extortion and blackmail. And this is what's happening right now. You know, what is the presidency going to be worth if you gut it of everything? What is the value of a Supreme Court justice if the procedure can't even be agreed upon? This is a death cycle spiraled down, and all because you don't like someone. Okay, I mean, you lost. They still can't get over it, and it's amplifying their ideological possession. You know, anyone that says anything remotely positive about a policy of the Trump administration, you're demonized. I mean, that's never happened before. And this is where we're going.
Alexander is MIA, guys. Hopefully he will be on soon. Hopefully he will be on soon.
No, not even a message on WhatsApp.
Yeah, not even a message on WhatsApp. Anyway, we will continue, and hopefully he will join us. Avril Spencer has a question. Who's taking power in the UK? What's going on in the UK.
Oh, I wish Mercouris was here.
Yeah, Mercouris would be the right one for this one. But Peter,
No, but the thing is that I think that the inner party squabbling among the Tories, see, they're destroying themselves also. The only thing that keeps them together is the prospect of a Jeremy prime ministership. That really scares them a lot, and that scares the establishment a lot. Trump was held in great suspicion when he was elected. Jeremy is somebody they loathe because he knows first of all, he's a real lefty. And when I say that, I don't say that disparagingly. I know where he's come from. I understand him. I could debate him. I would love that. We could come to some mutually satisfactory ideas and solutions because he's a fair man. He's a smart man. He's an honest man. He's so honest that this is what terrifies the establishment too, okay? All those expenditures you can take and all that, that allowed MPs, I think he had the least. He rides a bicycle, for God's sake. He's incorruptible. They are terrified of honest, legitimate, authentic people, even though I ideologically disagree with him, okay? But he is the establishment's worst nightmare. Their nightmare is worse compared to the nightmare the liberals have with Trump.
Peter, what's going on in Ukraine, in Eastern Ukraine? Will it ever return to Russia? Will Eastern Ukraine ever return to Russia? And can NATO be stopped? It's kind of simmered down right now, but there was a big debate in Russia, and it's one of those few times that people actually talk about politics, particularly foreign policy. And with Donetsk and Lugansk, should that be brought into Russia, like the Crimeans voted to come back to reunite with Russia? The problem is with what some people call the Donbass or Novorossiya is that there are a lot of Ukrainians there. And this is one of the reasons why Russia has been very hesitant, because if Russia were, and I'd hope it doesn't, military intervene there, there'll be a lot of people who say they're under occupation. And that's why Russia's never done it, even if they were asked to do it. So I hate to say this, but Ukraine's broken. It's broken. And Poroshenko is he's painted himself into a corner, because if he makes a deal with Lugansk and Donetsk, then everybody else in Ukraine is like, well, what about a deal for our region? Then you'll see the breakup of Ukraine. See, people like Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piat, they didn't think this through, that if you flip the government, you're gonna flip a very fragile place. And Ukraine was always fragile since the end of the Soviet Union, intensely corrupt. And inviting NATO, I think we see Alex coming in. Oh my goodness.
Hello.
Everyone's asking about you. Where you been?
Well, I'm afraid there was lots of things to say. There's been a fire in my house in Athens, which I had to deal with. But anyway, can you see me, guys?
That's like one thing after another happening.
It's been a nightmare.
We got Alexander Mercouris here. I forgot to get myself a bottle of water.
Alexander, take over. Peter deserves a 2-minute break.
Okay.
All right, Alexander, welcome. Everyone, I'm sure, is happy to see you. They're asking, where are you? Says, hi, Alexander.
Hello.
Some people were saying you got lucky. Some people were saying that you were on a bender last night.
I wish. We had two fires in our house in Athens. One was my father's computer sort of exploded, and then we had the fire brigade in. Then the fire brigade came in, there were sparks left over, and then they caught fire again. So I've had to sort all of that out today.
Okay, so everyone's saying hi to you
on
chat. Alexander, welcome. This is a good time to take a short breather. Remind everybody to send us your super chats. You can also donate to our PayPal page and our Patreon page. And guys, go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. Everyone loves the shirts. You will love the shirts as well. Everything really helps us out so we can continue to broadcast to you guys all the shows that we do, including the live chats that we are doing right now. Alexander, Peter was talking about Ukraine.
Yeah.
We've touched on a lot of topics from nationalism to U.S. politics to Syria and Iran. But I've got a question which is right down your alley, which was sent to us before we started the live chats. And this question is, let me pull it up real quick. From Gogo G Alupos, he sent it to us. He says, Alexander, how about seeing into the future and asking, how will a Turkey-controlled unified Cyprus serve the interests of Israel in the region long term?
Oh my goodness! Okay, what a question. First of all, Turkey.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, Turkey will not control a unified Cyprus. That is impossible. The people of Cyprus, that's to say the Greek Cypriot people, will never accept that, and that's not going to happen. That's the first thing. Will it serve the interests of Israel for Cyprus to be unified? I don't actually think that Israel really cares much about Cyprus one way or the other. I don't think this is going to be an issue for the people of for Israel. So I don't really see that Israel has any great interest in Cyprus one way or the other. That's my view. All
right, there you have it.
Yeah.
Boy, everyone, Alex had the white helmets at his house. Okay, someone wants to know, Alex, are you?
I hope not.
I hope not. Alexander Mercouris, are you in England?
I am in England. Indeed, I am very much in England. I'm back safely here in England. Weather is very different here, much cooler. But we have a wonderful political crisis, which is now exploding. You're all probably already been talking about that.
Tell us actually, me and Peter were talking about that. And Peter said, boy, this is a great question for Alexander. Tell us about Theresa May. And
Well, I think what's happened now is that everybody can see that Theresa May has made a total mess of Brexit. She's completely miscalculated the political situation in Britain. She's completely miscalculated the political situation in the EU. She put together a plan nobody wanted. She staked her career on it. And what she now has is everybody, the Europeans, as well as lots of people in her own party, are saying no. And she didn't understand the politics of Europe at all. She got European politics completely wrong. She thought she could play various EU countries off against the EU Commission. She didn't, I think, understand how few cards she has to play. Beyond that, she made a major miscalculation about the kind of Brexit she should have been seeking. She should have been seeking a simple, straightforward Brexit consistent either with a referendum decision or something of that nature. Instead, she went for this extraordinarily complicated hodgepodge, which nobody was going to like. The problem is, and we've talked about this many times, terrible leader though Theresa May is, there is no consensus within the Conservative Party about who should take over from her. So though on every conceivable logic she should go, for the moment, she is still there. She still stays. And what is now happening is that you see, as a consequence of this, politics in Britain dividing, with those people who are totally opposed to Brexit entirely now seeing their chance. And you see that there's a lobbying now going on to the Labour Party to try to get the Labour Party to commit itself to a second referendum, which is all about stopping Brexit. But on the other side, you're also seeing the very hard line, the strong Brexiteers, they're starting to mobilize also. So we have a political crisis, a government that's falling apart, a prime minister who's discredited and not liked by anybody, and we have no real confidence or certainty about where we're going.
Senator Mercouris, Alex, then what does Britain need democracy for?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, Peter, because, of course, nothing that's happened over the last 2 years bears any resemblance to democracy at all. And I think that is something that a lot of people are starting to say. And I think we're going to see at the end of this process, almost regardless of what happens, the most gigantic backlash. I mean, I can say that with absolute certainty.
You know, one of the things I think is quite fascinating is that, you know, regime change, all of the West has come to the West. It has come to the UK. It is because, you know, what Cameron and Theresa May hoped is that people would lose interest, or, you know, wouldn't care anymore, or, you know, oh, that doesn't really matter. I mean, these elites are so out of touch, and that applies to Russia, and the United States as well. They don't need any democracy. As a matter of fact, they loathe democracy.
Absolutely.
You know, Trump supporters smell. Did you know that?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Well, we have an expression. Can I just finish with that, Peter? There's an expression in Britain, which you hear a lot now, which is that if voting made any difference, they would abolish it. They would prohibit it. And that's the sort of mood we're starting to see here. It's very ugly. It's very bad. And one would like to feel that we're not going to be sort of put in a situation in a few months' time, because the crisis we have now is not the real crisis. The real crisis is going to come in March if the referendum result is disregarded, and then I really don't know what's going to happen.
All right, we got another super chat. Before I get to the super chat, two real quick questions. We're approaching 650 viewers on the live chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. To Peter, real quick, you answered this a bit before, but go into it again. From Stinger has a question: how are the Russians going to respond to the news that Poland might have a U.S. base?
Well, then Russia will have to take defensive measures to protect its sovereignty. Look, everyone, if a major military alliance is moving inextricably towards your border, saying we're nice guys, we were only projecting security and strength. I mean, well, that's just nonsense. That's just propaganda nonsense. Russia has made it very, very clear that it will never fight another conflict on its own soil. Take that seriously. Yeah. You cannot sit back and watch a sophisticated military machine that is rhetorically, publicly demonizing you. You can't take that for granted. No one can take that for granted. I mean, if Russia had military allies in Mexico and Canada, and they were moving troops to the U.S. border, how would the U.S. react? Okay, I mean, it's just common sense. Okay, you know, Russia is trying to defend its sovereignty, but first and foremost, there's nothing extraordinarily threatening about that.
Can I just add something, which is, of course, this is exactly what the Russians were told or promised back in the early 1990s would not happen. They were given very categorical promises at the time when Yeltsin was president that if and Gorbachev also, but also when Yeltsin was president, that there would be no NATO military facilities in Eastern Europe. That was absolutely said categorically. So the Russians are going to be saying again, once again, the West has shown that they are not capable of keeping their promises to us.
And on top of that, let's put the legal seal of approval on this here. In 1997, there was an agreement with the Russian NATO Council that NATO would not establish a permanent military base on Russia's periphery in NATO countries. Again, it's the U.S. that breaks its word.
Exactly. This is what I was referring to.
And that also involves anti-ballistic missile systems. Russia has to counteract them. So what we have instead of, I mean, folks, please, and we should be talking about demilitarizing Europe because it's not necessary. No. Okay, it's not necessary. What has this prompted Russia to do? To come up with the next generation or 2 generations up of defensive weaponry. Okay, right. If they think in the West that we're going to beat the Soviets in an arms race like we did during the Cold War, well, the Soviet Union opted out of the Cold War, folks. That's a separate podcast, okay? But what that'll do is Russia will spend 1/10 or less on what the West will spend on offensive weapons, okay, for no reason whatsoever except for the pad the pockets of the defense contractors and their willing idiots in Congress cross both parties.
Yes.
All right, super chat question, $20 from Henry Morgan. Alexander, and then Peter, what do you guys think the next move will the Chinese make since the last sanctions on them about the purchase of Russian military aircraft and S-400s?
Craziness.
I mean, you know, can I just say? I mean, you know, we have an ancient Greek expression: "Whom the gods destroy, they first make mad." The idea of sanctioning China, one of the oldest country, the oldest state in the world, a superpower, a country of enormous pride, sanctioning it because it chooses to buy weapons from another country. I mean, it is so stupid. I mean, that's the only word I can use to describe it. And of course, the Chinese will go on buying weapons from Russia. Sanctioning them in this way is going to make them even more determined to buy weapons from Russia.
This is exactly what the Washington consensus always says. They determine who you can be friends with. They determine who you can trade with. This goes back to this postmodernist ideology that I just mentioned earlier, that the liberals will determine who your friends are. They will be the litmus test, who you can interact with here. This is absolute lunacy. And what it is it'll be thrown right back into the face of the State Department and the Defense Department, okay? The Chinese are not going to take this seriously whatsoever. And all this stuff about a trade war, China has a lot of options. Remember, folks, China has a vast internal market that's still not completely developed. They don't need the United States. They're dumping their treasuries left and right. I mean, instead of being conciliatory, sitting down and negotiating like Trump said he wanted to, no, it's all unilateral.
Peter, are you pro-EU or against EU?
I can't believe anyone's asking me that question. I don't like what the EU has become, okay? The people that joined the European Union did not vote, not ever once, in a referendum to join the political project. They didn't. What they did was they wanted better movement of labor and of capital. And that was the European Economic Community. I was for that.
Yeah.
But not for this political project, because it centralizes way too much power, takes sovereignty away from member states. Then they start fiddling into your institutions and your culture and your religion. Brussels has no business doing that, and no one gave them the power to do it. This is turning into a Sovietized European Union. And people never voted for it. And now people are going to start voting against it, a la Brexit. Look what's going on in Poland, what's going on in Hungary, what's going on in Austria, and voices coming out of even the German establishment and in Italy, okay? So no, I'm very much against this project because it's a postmodernist, post-Marxist project that has no good solutions in the long run, even in the short run, as we can see.
Alexander, are you pro-EU, against EU? They want both of you.
Right. For most of my life, I was very pro-EU. I found it increasingly impossible to be so any longer. I mean, all that Peter said about the political nature of the project is true, but everybody who knows me knows that I want to take a big interest in economics, and the way the economics of the EU are being run is just calamitous. It is creating massive poverty in Southern Europe. It's creating growing inequality in Germany. It's creating all kinds of problems at every single level. And of course, it is not just a political project. It is not just an economic project that's going wrong. It's also an ideological one as well. And I think that the resistance that we're starting to see growing up in Central and East European countries is because they are also very unhappy by the kind of ideology that is now being imposed on them, which they see as incompatible with their own cultural values. So the answer is, I think it is not something I'm able to support any longer. I think it is creating division and problems in Europe. And I agree with Peter, there is no good end to this.
The European Union is synonymous with democracy deficit. Okay, that's your problem.
Yeah.
Alexander, your thoughts on Germany and the AfD?
Right. Well, I think that the AfD it follows exactly from what we were just talking about with the EU, what we have seen in Germany. I think, first of all, can we put aside this idea that Germany is this great economic success story? There is I understand there's a book coming out by a Greek academic called Lavelle, which actually looks into this in more detail. What has happened in Germany is that because of the way in which the EU is structured, there have been some people who have benefited and there have been many people who have lost. And those people who are losing are becoming increasingly angry, as they have every right to be. And they don't also like this extraordinary way in which German foreign policy is being run, no longer for the interests of Germany, but for the interests of some sort of Western project, which is incompatible with German traditions and German interests. And they don't also like the way in which they've been forced into accepting millions of people from overseas, from the refugees, and the way that was done. But can I just say, and I say this again and again and again, the immigration issue crystallizes concerns that many people in Germany and elsewhere in Europe have had for a very long time about the way in which the EU was going. It's not just the reason why people are now moving towards the AfD. And what you see with the AfD is a party which stands for German interests, as it explains them, that wants a German independent foreign policy, and that wants certain elements of German cultural and political identity reasserted. There is a great deal about the AfD I don't like. I don't like many of the politicians there. I don't like many of the things they say. I understand exactly where it is coming from. And I think that the response to it of the German political elite has been nothing short of disastrous.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is that as a historian, you know, the biggest question in the post-war period, post-World War II period, is really what to do with Germany. And it's never been satisfactorily worked out, because Germany has a splendid cultural history. I mean, truly. And I understand a lot of Germans that want to say, you know, we like that too. We can embrace that, and there's nothing wrong with doing it. Now, there are individuals out there that want to exploit this, and I have no time for them, because they're people that are not interested in dialogue. It's their way or no way. No, people that are cultural conservatives and want to preserve their national identity, I think is a perfectly legitimate position to have. There are people that, of course, abuse it.
Yes.
Peter, what is your opinion of the Eurasian Union?
Yeah. The thing is that one of the problems is that when you have these kind of blocks, traditionally you have a hegemon that pushes it. And this is the evolving relationship with China and Russia, because Russia doesn't want to be dominated by China, because both countries are very, very touchy about their sovereignty and being able to make sovereign choices. Russia and China do not have a military alliance, okay? They have a partnership. Neither country under their constitution can go into a military alliance. They would have to change those laws. And so I think it's a work in progress. I usually don't speak very highly of Boris Yeltsin, but this is something that I think he had some foresight, is that he got together with the Chinese and said, hey, you know, the Soviet Union is over. We have a lot of these post-Soviet nation states now. I'm thinking of all the stands. And why don't we cooperate together instead of compete for them? Because it'll just be a headache for both of us. And China and Russia agreed to that. And they're doing it ever since. Look, folks, the growth, the future growth of the global economy is there in Eurasia. It has a population growth. It has vast natural resources that have not been tapped into. Russia and China have the technology. They actually have the jobs too. A lot of migrants from the stands come to Russia. The Russians have got the immigration laws in order now. They don't have the seeking this border that's like a sieve. No, you get caught in Russia without papers. Oh lordy, that's a Jim Comey lordy. Okay, you don't want to be caught in Russia without your papers. Okay, There's no such thing as an illegal alien here. Okay.
Yeah, can I just chip in also, because of course the Eurasian Union, I mean, there are all these institutions that the Russians and the Chinese, but especially the Russians, have been creating on the territory of the former Soviet Union, and the drive to do that essentially is an economic one. All this region used to form not just one country, which was the Soviet Union, but what the Russians refer to as a single economic space. So it makes sense to reintegrate these linkages which had existed before, and it creates stability. Now, a lot of the problem that we are seeing between Russia and the West is that some people, Hillary Clinton being one, I mean, she actually said this, she sees this as an attempt to reestablish the Soviet Union. And this is nuts. This is not the agenda at all.
And this was the predicate, exactly what Alexander Mercouris is saying. This was the predicate to flip Ukraine, because Ukraine would have been part of this Eurasian Union. And she said explicitly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Rebuilding the Soviet Union, nobody in Russia, hardly anyone in Russia even utters the idea.
All right, keep the questions coming. We got a lot of questions. We're hitting 700 viewers almost. The questions are coming in really fast. Guys, real quick. Alexander, how will the BRICS fare if there is a financial crisis?
Right. I think that some BRICS will fare better than others. I think the Russians will cope very well. I mean, they have their own financial system worked out. They have their own currency, which is now floating. They have a budget surplus. They don't have much debt. It's the debt which is the real problem. I think the Chinese will cope perfectly well too. I mean, they have massive savings. They have a huge integrated economy. It's becoming more self-sufficient now. It's got good linkages with Russia. It isn't a problem. So I think the Russians and the Chinese will do okay. I think India will probably also struggle. Brazil and South Africa are going to have big problems if there's a big financial crisis, because their economies to a great extent are still integrated with those of the West. And I mean, when we talk about the BRICS, we should understand it's still very much a political gathering. It's very different countries meeting together and talking about various things and agreeing on some things and not agreeing necessarily on others. But it is not an integrated group of countries in the way that, say, the Eurasian Union, which we were talking about, is, or which the EU is. It's not like that. So we have to look at the effect of a financial crisis on different countries, considering their relative economic positions, which are very different.
The interesting thing is we take China out of the equation here, because there's a big question of how communist it is. But if you look at South Africa, very left wing. If you look at Brazil, a lot of left wing. Okay, and there's when I was in Beijing, I met representatives of the BRICS and from Brazil, and to some extent from India, and certainly from South Africa. They kind of have these vestiges of the Soviet Union and its ideology. And here I am in my bow tie and vest and say, no, we're conservatives. We're a conservative country. Okay, we're not left wingers like you. Okay.
Yes.
There's an ideological division there too. And it shouldn't be about ideology. It should be about national interest where everyone can benefit. And I think I kind of got maybe that far convincing them, but they at least nodded their head.
All right, Peter, what do you think of Michael Moore, his book, and his new movie?
I used to like Michael Moore because I thought he was a real muckraker. I think that his book, his film on Columbine, I'm kind of agnostic on the Second Amendment because people kill, it's not guns. So it's something wrong with American culture that it's so violent. I'm not going to say it's just about guns. But his Fahrenheit 9/11, about the issues surrounding the 9/11 attacks in 2001, I thought was really eye-opening. It was actually quite funny too. And then Sicko, I thought was brilliant. Okay. How unfair the American medical system is, okay? It really is. It's just for money, folks. It's just for money. It's not about people. But with this whole thing with Trump, I think Michael Morris lost his mind. I think he lost his mind. He's not worth listening to. It's just a waste of time.
Alexander.
It's about him. It's all about himself. It's all about himself. Okay, and he's part of this band of just demonizing anyone that disagrees with him, and he's supposed to be the most tolerant person on the planet. He's just a contradiction walking around in a baseball cap.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I would add there is something about Donald Trump and the name of Donald Trump that seems to just make these people go absolutely nuts. For me, looking at this, it's very difficult sometimes to understand quite why Donald Trump is having this effect. I used to think that Michael Moore was quite an intelligent guy, actually. But I mean, the way he's talking now, it's just loopy. And some of the things that he's saying and some of the people he's basically aligning himself with are in total contradiction of what he was all about just a little while ago.
The interesting thing is that he's speaking on, now he's in this very apocalyptic mode. Yeah. Donald Trump may be the last president of the United States. What do you mean? Is the country going to fall apart? Is it going to cave in? What role are you going to play in that? Okay. Oh, and are you going to put on a black bandana or one of some kind of black clothing? I mean, fight with Antifa? I mean, wow. He doesn't make any sense right now. And he's just on this bandwagon with all these other leftist, ideologically possessed people that just can't think straight, okay? I mean, how many of them tweet something and then delete it because, oh, that sounds kind of crazy, okay? It happens all of the time. Yeah, it's a syndrome. It is really driving everyone nuts. I watch Trump's rallies, and I think to myself, there he goes again. He goes exaggerating again, and everybody knows it, and it's just his speaking style. And and then he lied 733 times in that speech. No, he didn't lie. That's just the way he talks. Okay, why do you take it so seriously?
Exactly.
All right, Alexander, what is happening with Bill Browder and Danske Bank?
Well, First of all, can I just explain what this whole Danske Bank thing is? It's all about money laundering. And of course, when people talk about money laundering in Britain and in other countries, they always talk about Russian money laundering, even though there is very little actual evidence that most money laundering involves Russia. And of course, Bill Browder is going around reporting to everybody that all this is going on. He's become this crusader against Russia and everything to do with Russia, and he's trying to point fingers at corruption all over the place. I have to say straightforwardly and simply, nothing Bill Browder says I believe any longer. I'm going to say it as simply as that. I think anything he says is it is from such a poisoned source that I mean, I would be telling the truth sometimes, but I just.
He should a person that really knows something about Russia should have a debate with him, because what his knowledge of Russia is very, very thin. It's just basically propaganda and lies, and just one big conspiracy theory to protect him from entering an oath.
Yes.
Yep. Alexander.
Yes. Hello.
Yes. Do you want to continue on that?
No, I mean, that's my essential thing. I mean, the other thing, of course, about Browder is he's a very self-interested man. He's got all this business going on in Russia with the Magnitsky thing and with Hermitage Capital, and the Russians have brought all these charges against him that he looted Russia and Russian companies and that he didn't pay tax in Russia. So, in a sense, he has to keep this story going in order to try and defend himself from the allegations that the Russians are making against him. And one of the interesting things about Bill Browder is that whenever he has an opportunity to defend himself against the charges the Russians are bringing against it in court, be it in courts in Britain or courts in America, or of course courts in Russia, but let's, especially Britain and America, he always finds a way to avoid doing so. And that, for me, is the thing that makes me most suspicious of all about him. Now, I'm going to finish by saying that there is a very fascinating film, which has been much talked about, by a man called Andrei Nekrasov, who is a Russian filmmaker who was a great believer in Browder and
not a friend of Putin, not a friend of
Putin at all. And Nekrasov found himself totally disillusioned with Browder after having initially believed in him, and he made this film, which basically Nekrasov says exposes the truth of the Magnitsky affair. And what has Browder's response been? He's tried to suppress any attempt to show it. And that is very much the pattern of Browder's activities. He makes all these allegations against the Russians. He tries to suppress whenever he can any comments about him. And I'm afraid, in terms of East-West relations, he's done enormous damage. Enormous damage.
Based on lies.
Based on lies. Alexander, they're asking you about Tommy Robinson and what's going on there, if anything.
Well, lots are going on, actually. I mean, he's out of prison, as Alex and I discussed, and I think Peter and Alex also discussed. I mean, this was an extraordinary case. So he's back, he's free, he's active again. He wants to join UKIP. Some people in UKIP want him to join UKIP. Nigel Farage is not keen on having him in UKIP, either because he finds him, he's concerned about some of the things Tommy Robinson says, which doesn't surprise me, by the way. I'm disturbed by many of the things that Tommy Robinson says. Or possibly he sees in Tommy Robinson a potential rival. But I'm absolutely sure that we've not heard the last of Tommy Robinson. And if he has become a famous person in Britain and around the world, it was because of this extraordinarily botched way in which the case around him was handled, and a straightforward attack, as far as I'm concerned, on free speech. And that's all I get to say about that.
All right, guys, you can send us your super chats. We're approaching an hour and a half, close to 650 viewers, and we just got a super chat from St. Longinus. Peter, who may be the next president of Russia? Any contenders on the horizon and any info on their backgrounds?
Not yet, but this is my theory, and this is only my theory, is that in the circle around Putin, and it could be a wide circle, I think he's going to identify someone that he thinks is one, or obviously more than one individual that could carry on his legacy. And I think that he will back them both equally and let the electorate decide. But it will be someone that will continue the legacy of the last 18 years. And I think, irrespective of what you read in the Washington Post and New York Times, people want that legacy overwhelmingly. And that's a legacy of continued prosperity with the bumps in the road, but there have been, but to continue down the path of modernization and sovereigntizations, maintaining Russia's independent action on the world stage. That's very important, politically, economically as well. So I think we'll find that out. I don't think Putin is going to, run again. There is a possibility that he will fire the government and appoint a prime minister that might be his successor. That's how he became president when Boris Yeltsin resigned. So there's a couple of scenarios out there. There's not much talk about it, really. People are talking about their families, where they're going to go on vacation, the ruble. That's what people are talking about. They're not talking about Putin's successor, not yet.
Alexander?
Yes, I would endorse all of that. I think it's far too early.
And also answer this real quick, Alexander, to get into Putin. There was just a question right now. Also answer it, if you can't fit it in, will Russia have a female president?
Right. Okay. Well, one of the contenders, and this is an outside possibility, is a woman. It is Valentina Matviyenko, who is the head of the Federation Council. She was the former governor of St. Petersburg, and she now heads the Federation Council, and she's on Russia's Security Council, and she's been doing an awful lot of diplomatic activity. Now, I don't think many people expect her to become president, but it's a possibility. And can I just say, I think people will be entirely comfortable in Russia with a woman.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think Russians would, you have to understand, if you look at the managerial classes in Russia, if you look at the medical sector, there are more women than men, okay? Yes. Women with power in Russia is nothing new at all.
No. But basically, it is premature at this time to talk about successors to Putin. As Peter correctly says, nobody in Russia, I think, is really debating this at the moment. Putin is very much in charge. He may have some ideas in his own mind, but he's keeping those very close to himself. The country is highly institutionalized. And this is something that I think people in the West simply don't understand. I mean, there is a parliament which works, there is a government which works, there is institutions like the State Council and the Security Council. I am absolutely no doubt, exactly as Peter says, that whoever takes over from Putin will follow broadly the same course, because the course that is being followed, especially in foreign policy, is one which is shaped around Russian national interests, and that they're not going to change that. They saw what happened.
It's not a Putin problem; it's a Russia problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
They saw what happened in the 1990s when they sacrificed their interests for good relations with the West. It was a disaster for them, and they're not going to make that mistake again, whoever is in charge.
All right. Let's see. Well, would Israel be a more peaceful country if Netanyahu was not prime minister?
I don't think so, actually. I mean, I think that Netanyahu, if I may say so, is, if anything, a more cautious figure than he's sometimes given credit for. He tends to avoid getting into direct conflict. So I know that doesn't sound like the common view in the West, but I know it's a fairly widespread view in Israel. And I think if you look at the whole direction of Israeli policy over the last 30, 40 years, it is becoming more, I'm going to say confrontational and more assertive to the countries around itself. And I think this is a great problem, because I think that Israel, the government of Israel, is not seeking peace in the Middle East. It is seeking victory. It is seeking victory inside Palestine, where it wants to basically make a Palestinian state impossible. It is seeking victory in its relations with the Arab states. And in the short term, it might even achieve it. But the short term is often very short. And if you look at the area that Israel is in, I think that if you really want peace, that means you have to compromise. And I don't see much sign of any willingness to do that in Israel at the moment.
The interesting thing is that Israel really, it hates being in the Middle East. It wants to be part of the West proper. And it wants to be accepted as that. And unfortunately, because of its Zionist ideology, it's in contradiction with basic Western values. And so this is the dilemma it's created for itself.
Yeah.
Thing is that Israel is about power, and everybody knows that, okay?
Yeah.
But that's not going to keep the society together. Israeli society is deeply divided on many, many issues. Yeah. And they have their own internal problems to work out with, don't have any real good answers, unfortunately. One thing that does give the body politic some kind of brings them together is stirring up trouble on its neighbor on its neighbor's borders and in the region. And so, quagmire, and the more quagmire is around it, the more it feels safe. But that's counterintuitive. It's not safer when it has so much insecurity around it, because you can't control everything. This is not like a computer program. The variables pop up that look, Israel's whole diatribe against Iran in this century is only made Iran stronger. It's because of failed Western policies, not because of a proactive policy necessarily on the part of Tehran. Israel miscalculates very often.
Yes. Can I just add one very last thing on this? Because I think it's an important point, which is that the uncritical support Israel gets from the United States, regardless of how extreme Israel's actions are, is very bad for Israel. Because it undercuts any force for moderation or for compromise or for peace within Israel itself. Because the war party in Israel can always say there is no downside to what we do. If we create war in Syria, if we create war in Lebanon, if we build more settlements in the West Bank or tighten up on Gaza,
impunity.
The US is going to support us. So, and that ultimately is not good for Israel at all.
All right, we got two questions. We're going to wind it down for the next 10, 15 minutes. We'll wind it down in 10, 15 minutes. We have two questions on Assange back to back. Will Russia step in and give Assange asylum and remove him from the UK? And the next question is, will Russia accept Julian Assange? Of course, he would have to get out of his prison first.
Right,
well,
can I go?
If he made it to Russia, maybe, but I don't see how that's going to happen.
Yeah. Can I say a few things? I mean, I think that Julian Assange made a very bad decision when he chose the Ecuadorian embassy to flee to when he did. I mean, if the only country that could have protected him then is Russia, I don't see how the Russians can protect him. And I don't see how the Russians can help him. That is gone. That's lost. And can I say, we have had a spectacular example of fake news recently in Britain, where the newspapers here have been full of stories about a sort of secret deal that was done between Ecuador and Russia, whereby Ecuador was going to somehow smuggle Assange into the Russian embassy, and the Russians were somehow going to extract Assange to Russia. And we've had all the newspapers here in Britain reporting this nonsense as if it was true. The Ecuadorians have denied it. The Russians have denied it. The whole thing is so far-fetched as to be completely ridiculous, and yet it's still being reported as if it was true.
It's because of Snowden. This is why people are inventing. Look, Snowden ended up in Moscow. He ended up being a big headache for the Russians, okay? A big one. And a compromise was made. And I still believe that Snowden, if he wants to leave Russia, he should be able to go to a safe haven. Okay, he had no choice. But it wasn't something the Russians wanted, and they had to find a way to fix that. Okay, it's one of the very few times, guys. Maybe our audience will like this. Is that Vladimir Putin is a politician that always wants to have options. He doesn't want to get boxed in on something. That's why he's usually successful in what he does. Snowden was a real thorn because, well, you guys, he doesn't like people that betray their country. And in his eyes, you know, that's what it was. Okay, and he's an old school guy. He's very old school, and so they found a compromise. I don't think the Russians want to get involved in the Julian Assange case. No. Okay, they don't, and I don't think anyone here would proactively suggest that. Why?
Especially now, when, of course, the whole centerpiece of the Russiagate story is that Assange is a Russian agent. So, I mean, bringing Assange to Moscow is going to make people in the US say, it's true. The Russians really do.
I can tell you the Russian intelligence community would never trust Julian Assange as one of theirs. Never. Ever, under any circumstances. Never.
Agreed, agreed.
All right, guys, we're going to start winding it down, but I'm going to ask a final question to both of you, which is the same question. What are we looking forward to in the week coming? What do you think are going to be the hot stories to keep an eye on?
Right. Well, the big story here in Britain is going to be the unraveling of. I mean, this is a psychodrama, and we've got to watch it, and it's going to continue. The other big story for me, actually, internationally, you probably
that was the unraveling of what
Theresa May and Brexit and all of that in Britain. I mean, that's going to go on. Now, the other big story for me, I'm sure you talked about it. The one that interests me an awful lot is this Brett Kavanaugh business in America, which I must admit, I wasn't there while you probably talked about it, but that is so strange and so bizarre and so
real quick, Alexander, me and Peter did a video on this, and we talked about it. Like, touched upon it at the beginning of the live chat. What's your take on it?
A brilliant video. Well, I mean, it's very simple. Here is a man who, whatever your views about his views, is completely qualified to be a Supreme Court justice. He went through all the hoops to get confirmed, and now out of nowhere, we see this allegation totally uncorroborated by other witnesses. There's no evidence about it. Apparently, the person who's making it, this person, she can't even remember the exact year when it's supposed to have happened. And yet, this whole thing has been derailed, and we've now seen extraordinary things, like people even saying that merely because an allegation has been made against Kavanaugh, that in itself somehow disqualifies him. Well, this is so wrong at so many levels. It's wrong at the basic level of Brett Kavanaugh. It is wrong at a political level because we see the Democrats playing an absolutely shockingly bad game here. And I have to say this, I mean, it's going to be very bad for relations between genders in America, where I must say, I think an awful lot of people, men must be saying to themselves, well, for goodness sake, you know, is any allegation going to be accepted in this form? And it's going to be very bad for many women in America who are going to be saying, well, you know, what is our relationship between men and women? It's anyway, that's in summary what my views are.
Yeah, because, you know, the left, they want to destroy all of these institutions. Now they're taking on the judicial system. They must control it. It must be theirs. This is only about power. It is not about the law, the rule of law, the presumption of innocence. No. These are all the predicates of the system that the West developed over the last few hundred years. Far from perfect. But the world wants to emulate it, and you have these liberals, postmodernists, post-Marxists, they want to burn it all to the ground, okay? Yes. That's their contribution to the not the development of Western civilization, but its final destruction. Yes. They destroy the rule of law.
Well, absolutely. And as I said, a very, very disturbing ideas that are being spread now. That, I mean, there's an article in The Guardian, which is, of course, a British newspaper, but it's widely read in America, which basically says that, which takes the view that when an allegation of this kind is made by a woman, it must be believed. And, you know, even though there is no corroboration behind it. So don't look for evidence. Don't look for corroborative witnesses. Destroy a man's career and reputation on the word of somebody.
You know, the interesting thing in all of this here, all of this is fascinating. It's only a group of ideologically possessed women that have done this, okay? Men haven't done anything at all except for react. A woman gives a letter to a congressman gives it to a female senator leaks it. Okay, and then this defendant and her crazy liberal possessed person, this Katz woman, she doesn't even want a woman to interview her. Yeah. Okay, I mean, and then they reverse the roles of who is interviewed first. I mean, this is tearing everything down, short-circuiting the entire process.
And as Peter correctly says, it violates due process. I mean, once again, a man is being asked to prove his innocence when, of course, the whole nature of the system, the whole tradition, the whole Western tradition is that innocence is assumed until guilt is established by due process of law.
I guess you're going to have to fire all of those FBI agents that did the 6 background checks on him.
Yes.
Okay, then they should be put on trial for malpractice, okay? Yes. This thing will never end if they let this happen.
Anyway,
the consequences of this are grave, grave, grave.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's one. Those are two big events, and I understand that Putin is on the move again. He's probably off to Germany before very long, and that could be a very interesting event because, of course, the German policy is shifting. I think they're becoming increasingly concerned about the way in which Western policy is becoming more confrontational towards Russia. US policy is becoming more confrontational, and I get the sense that the wind in Germany is starting to shift. So would be seeing lots of things going on there too.
Peter, aside from Kavanaugh and the stories at Alexander, what else do you see on the horizon?
Obviously, I'm going to be watching what's going on with Syria. I think that's very, very important. I think the political dance there is just got into swing. I think I said it earlier today on my program Crosstalk. We have another tipping point. You know, how many tipping points have we had with Syria? Yeah. I'll be watching that. I'm going to be watching the Chinese reaction to the insult they sent out by Washington regarding the arms deal with Russia and with the stalled trade talks. The Chinese got a lot of cards to play, folks. Okay, this is not a good way. I hate to invoke history, but this is beginning to look like the late 30s, early 40s when it comes to trade. Ain't good.
No.
Okay, good. All right, guys. And on that note, we will be ending our 5th live chat. Alexander Mercouris, thank you for joining us. We hope your house is okay. Yes. Peter Lavelle did a lot of heavy lifting today.
We certainly did. Peter, you've been a hero.
Well, my father said to me once, "You better hope someone would pay you to talk." How did he know?
All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining the chat. We almost hit 700 viewers. Maybe we passed 700 viewers. We had 650 people on the chat consistently throughout. Thank you very much. Thank you for your super chats. And thank you for all the donations, all the t-shirts that you've bought. And thank you for listening to our videos. Click that like button, click that subscribe button, share this video, share our channel with your friends. Peter, Alexander, any last words before we sign off for tonight?
It's been a pleasure to
Alexander, Christoforou, maybe a few hours earlier, you can send out when we're going to do it next week so we can get more questions.
All right, we'll do. Alexander.
And apologies, guys, for being so late. It's always a pleasure to get your questions and go on sending them. And next time, I will definitely be there on time.
All right, we'll see everybody next week. Until then, everyone have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Take care.